Great.
I was supposed to be there this weekend.
Where in Utah?
Bryce, we're going to, I have two events.
Bryce Canyon?
Yeah, Zion and Bryce.
Yeah, man. Yeah, I'm right near Zion, and we're gonna make a trip to Bryce sometime in the next few weeks. All right, everybody. I got Brandon Powell here. Man, I've got so many good things to say about this man. He came out to the Strong Coach Summit back in August and just blew their minds, and the best way possible, and changed people's lives forever. So stay tuned into this. You're really going to enjoy it. I met Brandon, was it maybe 2 years ago, 3 years ago?
Yeah.
And took me through some breath work that was the best breath work I'd ever been taken through. Is just super, super deep. And his knowledge around breath, around ice, around movement, around being a better human being and building up this physical body and also the mental body. He's got this stuff zeroed in. So I'm excited to get down today and chat because Brandon has a lot to say. And it's always a joy for me to listen. We'll start it off with how are you doing with this coronavirus quarantine situation?
Well, it's definitely taken some adaptation because I had a busy life, man. I was a small business owner. So all that they're saying about small businesses being impacted is real. And ultimately, my business pretty much depends on groups of people in certain situations being very up close and personal.
Yeah, tell us what is your normal business?
So I have a dojo that I run, and so I own, operate a dojo in Charlotte, North Carolina, and our focus is Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and Muay Thai, kickboxing, and some conditioning work oriented towards those things. And ultimately, outside of that, I have a side business where I go around and I teach the Wim Hof method, and I do that internationally. So in every possible way that I could be impacted by this thing, I have been, as far as, all of our jobs being shut down, no travel, no nothing. And so, it's been a true test because now we're trying to switch a lot of things online, like many trainers are doing, and we're having to make some real adjustments. And so, yeah, we've been sat down a lot, man. I haven't been able to move much. But the other side is, one thing that I hate about all the traveling and moving around is that I miss my family. So I'm spending a lot of time with my family, which is good. And it's always good to be with them. And yeah, man, I think I'm probably in the same place most everybody is.
Yeah. There's you have years of breath and ice under your belt, both of which improve the immune system, which puts you in the best position out of most people, I imagine. Do you feel that way?
Well, I definitely feel like the tools that I utilize are powerful ones, and that they have the potential to strengthen your respiratory system, which in this case would be, really important. And since we really don't fully know exactly what this thing is yet and how it's truly affecting the lungs, because there's conflicting reports and information that's out there, ultimately what we do know is that it seems to attack people more so than not that have pre-existing conditions that ultimately, involve the respiratory system. And so, strengthening the lungs, but then also, the Wim Hof method is more, it encompasses much more than just breath work, cold, and even mindset training. It's the integration of those things coming together that really creates this whole other resonance coming from it that, linking everything together, because breath work is a closed loop, cold, say, training, if you want to put it that way, is a closed loop. Mindset work is a closed loop. But linking these things together really brings about so many other facets of, or I should say, it touches so many other facets of your life, you know. And so the method itself definitely gives you powerful tools to, you know, strengthen your system. And I mean, I could draw some, you know, I could show some parallels in research that where they're saying that they've used certain anti-inflammatories in relation to knocking this thing back. And what the Wim Hof method has shown to do is specifically attack these cytokine proteins that ultimately are showing up, you know, in the overreacting kind of systems that we're seeing with the COVID.
Yeah, one of the things I'm seeing when I started looking into what's actually happening and looking into it, it's the overreaction or the inability for the immune system to react appropriately that is causing that creates the symptoms that are being expressed. So it's not the virus, it's the reaction of the body to the virus trying to detox. And if it's got too much to detox, then it becomes overwhelmed, and then you end up with those symptoms. And so what you're alluding to with the cytokines is the production of that creates havoc. We'll just say that in the body. And people who are in good cardiovascular shape, who do training that's hypoxic, that expose themselves to cold ice, maybe heat, ice, all that stuff, the immune systems are more likely to respond appropriately to a threat and not overreact or underreact. And of course, if you're already healthy, then we already know that just having a robust body and having good breath and being able to handle elements is a good idea. I mean, I don't think it takes a rocket scientist to do that. I had someone argue with me, start DMing me and hitting me up on Instagram. One of those, he's like, "Are you saying that it, you know," I was saying, hey, people who are like just hoping that the vaccine is going to come and save them probably don't understand how to take care of their health, and they're probably not that healthy. You know, if someone's really dialed in, I don't give a shit if a fucking vaccine comes along or not, because I've taken good care of myself. I understand the system well enough to go, this isn't that big of a threat to me. But the people who feel threatened by this, my perception of people who feel threatened by this don't actually understand the whole system in regard to maintaining good health.
Yeah, well, I think that's what you just said there, the whole system. You know, my approach to so many things with what I do is very much a holistic thing. I want there to be a completion, you know, and with the Hof method in particular, though this relates to all the work that I do, I believe this completely. But with the Hof method in particular, one of the things that's so profound about it is the intuition that it helps you develop, this internal recognition. You know, Wim says feeling is knowing, that kind of things. You know, it reminds me of the old Bob Marley line, those who feel it know it, you know. And the thing is that ultimately it gives you this internal awareness, man. If you're subjecting yourself to the type of stress that we do with, say, cold training, you start to you know, sense these major cues and switching in the nervous system, going back and forth from high sympathetic states into deep, relaxing parasympathetic states, and you know, and going through it fast enough to develop this relationship with that change, that the identification of knowing that you're in a stress state or you're relaxed becomes something that is very intuitive. I mean, and I worry for people who are disconnected from that and maybe don't realize like the elevation of stress that could become a new normal in certain ways, and extremely impactful, because if they're not, you know, de-stressing, they're not de-escalating, then I imagine that idle switch is going higher, and ultimately people don't realize that basically is what's going to break you down. So and I worry, if I had one thing to truly worry about with all of this stuff, ultimately it's the DNA and how we affect our systems overall. And it just seems to me that if you want to function the best, you have to develop some type of an intuition into how you're responding down to the nervous system level.
Yeah,
and how
you can tell that people don't have that intuition because all they want to reference is an article or a paper or a doctor. They have no internal reference. And
right.
So there's an over reliance on information that's coming outside of themselves. There's a lack of self-validation. And without having taken the time to build that awareness around self, things can seem scary and things can seem as a threat. And they are a threat if you haven't done that. And another thing that I'm noticing is I'm hearing, anytime I bring up these conversations, well, most of the time when I bring up these conversations with people, I'll get some kickback and go, well, there's healthy people that have died. And then I come back with, please define healthy. Because just because you don't have a chronic disease that's been identified by a doctor up until this point doesn't mean you're healthy. I see sick people everywhere that call themselves healthy. They're overweight, they're inflamed, they don't sleep well, they have chronic stress. Like this is exactly what you're talking about. Their idle is so high. And when you say idle, that's their normal. So they think it's normal to be stressed every day. They think it's normal to sleep 5 hours a night and have a hard time falling asleep. They think it's normal to be breathing short in their chest all the time. They don't know what it's like to be healthy. And so they call what they have as healthy because they haven't had anybody tell them they're going to die soon.
Right. I'm sorry, man.
It's okay.
So yeah, I feel that, oh man.
What do you got going on over there?
I don't know, man. This whole adjustment to computer life, this is one of my if I had a single default, it is this. I am not tech savvy at all. I depend on my wife for just about everything related to that. And I'm just a caveman. And actually I search out things caveman like, and very much, I'm uninterested in the computers, but I feel that what happens is, Mike, is that there's a lack of critical thinking. We're in a time where we're inundated with information, and it's very hard to cipher through it all. If you're really going to be a critical thinker, what's so necessary is compiling subject matter, erasing contradiction, coming to a point where you really can see a common thread running through things. And most people don't have that type of true capacity to sit down and really get into information. I don't think it's ever been harder to figure out the truth about something than it is now, when there's so many ways to see information. And people, this is where it gets, I think, where we come into our true conundrum, which is the lack of philosophy and how to truly approach problem solving, and looking at, how much are you being affected by some type of an emotional state that you might be unaware of, or you're swaying things to belief systems that might not be, there's a lot of contradiction, I think, in what people are doing, what they're saying. And that's where, I think I heard you mention it on a podcast the other day. The virus is not what worries me. It's ultimately people's perspectives and larger groups tend to overpower smaller groups sometimes. So, it's just all I can do in my own situation, my own personal bubble. I know this, and this is where I really feel that these techniques have come into play, is manage my internal stress system, and then see how, at that point, if I feel I'm managed and balanced, how I can affect the small things around me. I mean, if anything, shows you like how small and compact everything is, man. Like we're all in our houses now. We have very little area to affect. It's what are you doing with your space and your time and where's your mind at, and the techniques that I utilize keep me in ritualistic practice, which allows me to just keep functioning and feeling balanced internally, which is all I can really ask for personally.
I'm a month in, and I'm in the best shape I've been in years.
Yeah, right.
I'm like, oh shit, I've got a routine. I'm not traveling so much. Every morning I wake up, I do breath work, I work out, and I take a cold shower. It's like, what's a better routine than that? And
no, it's great.
My only trouble is I for the first time in years, I've had a hard time going to sleep at night. And really? I was trying to figure out what it was. And you know what it is I'm so fucking excited about all the work I'm doing. Like all the work is so exciting. It's just, it's like, I can't wait for tomorrow. It's like, I'm having like Christmas Day, a child's Christmas Day syndrome, whatever you want to call it, every day. So, which is not the worst reason to fall asleep. It's not because I'm not worried or stressed. It's more excitement. So,
yeah, I think excitement's great. You know, there's always these precipices once you step over. I think, you know, things can funnel into being anxiety if you're too connected to the future, and things can be really depressing if you're way connected to the past. You know, if you're hanging on to things. Again, man, I'm with you. I'm like passionate about the things that I'm doing right now, like super focused and passionate about the things I'm doing, which is what ultimately has allowed me to really keep my focus. And, you know, I've been doing so much with the online stuff now and working with so many different clients that ultimately, I'm really seeing that this can actually be really impactful training, man. So I don't feel completely disconnected, you know, and that's really fed up the passion as well. So I can say I have not had a hard time sleeping at all. I get up super early. I'm on the Jocko regiment, man. I'm up early. Yeah, I'm up early, and that's been like part of my rituals. Like I feel like for some reason, if I'm up at 4:30, then I'm better managing my state, but it puts me down at night, you know?
Yeah, I think that's probably part of what it is. I've been letting myself sleep as long as I want. And I got up at 5:30 this morning. This morning, and I'm really pleased with my day so far. So maybe I'll keep it up. We'll see. We'll see. Part of it is in Utah, the sun's going down after 8:00. So it makes that's part of it. All right. I want to dig into, we talked the other day, you've been getting into new movement. You've been studying movement. So, you know, we start talking about breath, immune system, health, current events. And one of the reasons I wanted to get you on, I do want to discuss all that with you because you have a great mind for it. And we were talking about some new movement stuff. And you also alluded to, you know, we have a lack of critical thinking. And one of the things that you do well is you are a critical thinker. And so you've been looking at all these different systems, and you're a black belt in jiu-jitsu, and you've been studying movement on different levels for a long time. And you were breaking some stuff down for me the other day. I go, oh, okay, well, we got to talk about this on the show. And I titled the show, it's streaming on YouTube and Facebook right now. I titled the show is like The Purpose of Your Training or something, or Training with Purpose with Brandon Powell is what I called it, because when we were talking the other day, I go, oh yeah, this is exactly what we're talking about is most people are training for the purpose of, they're usually doing two things. One, it's just, most people are training to look good. Even if it's like, I deadlifted 500 pounds, you still want people to know you deadlifted 500 pounds. So it came from looking good. And so like, it's people want to lose weight. They want to put on muscle mass. They want to do all these things. And so I think if you start digging into someone's purpose really deep, if you get in a conversation with them, they unwind some shit, they may be like, oh, maybe what I'm doing, I don't really have a great sense of purpose around my training. Maybe that's why I never reach my goals. And maybe that's why training is hard and this and this and this. And so when we were talking the other day, you started talking about, why am I training and what's the purpose of the movements and all that stuff. So yeah, please, can you shed some light on that, on, the frame, the lens in which you're looking at training through?
Sure. I mean, for me, it's a huge merging or fully integrating a lot of, I'd say, my philosophy, the principles of my philosophy, like how I live my life, how I raise my family, and so forth, to the various training regimens that I've done throughout the years, exposing myself to a lot. What has really brought out the principles. Like you were saying, for me, it's about training and for so long it has been about training for objective. What am I actually doing? Like, why am I training this way? If I'm going to do something, how do I categorize it? Like, where does it fit in? Where's the overlap, in other words? And so, quite simply, for me, why I train is for self-defense. That's ultimately why I train, and everything, it comes from that. Self-defense is initially about empowerment, and I mean, I think it becomes more about really diving into the technical aspects of things as you become proficient enough to feel that you are empowered enough to continue to move forward. And so for me, it was initially my lifestyle, or I should say my life in general, just sort of demanded that I knew how to defend myself and knew how to take care of myself. And I started down that road young, went through lots of things, trained lots of ways. Interestingly enough, it was, the framework of boxing, of jujitsu, these two art forms that ultimately gave me such a tremendous sense of overall movement ability, because, and I can expand on it, but just as this complete sense of overall movement from, the skill sets that are being developed, of striking arts and then of grappling arts. And so it was really, as I moved into those things years ago, all I wanted to do is enhance those things. So I tried everything. I mean, I've swung the kettlebells and the maces, and I've done it all, man. We used to have religious burpee workouts, and I could just, everything that you can do in conditioning, I've tried it, man. I've been to the CrossFit boxes. Back in the day, it was the Nautilus approach. I mean, I've done them all, man. I've done the powerlifting approach, the bodybuilding approach. I've tried it all. But
how old are you?
I'm 44.
Yeah.
So
you've been around the block. You've been doing this your whole life.
Yeah. I started really young, as a kid, and have just stayed with it. And I love it. It's an absolute, I'm the gym rat. I'm this is a passion project for me that, wasn't my first, I actually left high school and became a mason, and I built houses for years and did masonry work, predominantly block and stone work, very arduous, hard work, pushing wheelbarrows, carrying cement, all these things that ultimately now are done in gyms as conditioning exercises.
Yeah, they pay to do it.
I know,
Dude, I grew up in construction, and I started lifting weights when I was 15. And my dad, he goes, "What the fuck are you doing? Why don't you just go pour concrete?" He said, go. He's like, "If you want to be strong, go work concrete."
That's true, man. It's true. Backbreaking labor. So anyway, for me, again, just coming, and I model a lot of my own personal philosophy around building houses, man. I mean, like, how are we going to approach a task? Well, do you have a blueprint? Do you know how to read a blueprint? Do you know how to, read a transit, pour foundation, lay your first courses of masonry and start building your house? These things I've done so many times that it really developed a way that I think and approach projects and when I'm building something. But the integration of, like, bringing all my stuff together really informed some insight into a new movement protocol that's, it's gained some steam. I'm not sure that I wasn't, a little over a year ago, I wasn't like the victim of predictive marketing, because I think I got sent this thing because I was looking for running. Do you remember I even called you and I was asking you about running some, because I was really trying to up my running game. And, this is a thing that I really feel like translates into everything. And so I wanted to become a better runner. So, and I really like to go hard. So I wanted to be able to put a couple hours under my belt every time I went, and I was breaking down. And then I started adopting these movement patterns and restructured the way that I was running. I recognized the movement patterns through the martial arts, and it really, through the specific diagnostic processes of looking at things through slow motion video, could really identify my problems. Like I've so clearly understood my own processes as when I'm watching myself in slow motion, like ultra slow motion,
Dude, that's tough, man. That's like going back, listening to a podcast, watching myself lift weights, all these things. I don't want to do it. I don't want to see what it looks like. Oh,
critical though, man. You got to be critical.
Yeah.
And for me, I was suffering from an Achilles problem and a calf muscle problem. So I knew that this was something that I could fix. And once I saw what was happening with my foot, and then I made the adjustments with my foot, it actually, increased the range of motion at my knee, at my hip, through my spine, through my shoulders. It really opened me up just through the adjustments of my feet and the conscious, ritualistic, religious approach to not ever turning back, just staying with it until I made it right. And now I'm crushing runs. I'm training hard. I want to do some ultra endurance stuff, and just for my own, just for fun, but I want to compete. And this type of basically recruiting these old patterns, which the system is called GOTA, GOATA, and you could find out about them online. You may agree with some of their stuff, you may not. What I've learned with looking at people and their training methodologies is that you have to, just because a person says one thing doesn't mean I'm going to discount everything else that they're saying. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I recommend just like really looking at it instead of being put off by one thing or another. What actually drew me in was its recognition of vortex energy. So this is something that's way off in left field.
All right. Yeah. Fill us in, because you and I have had conversations about vortex mathematics and other things. And so I don't know if you can, I don't know, give it a shot. Let's hear it.
Well, let's just make it real simple, man.
Okay.
I'll make it simple by first making it a little complex. Let's call the vortex the same thing that Walter Russell called it. And really he might have been more appropriately talking about a toroid, which is a donut shaped orb kind of structure that ultimately the spiral is a intelligence of a fractal nature. So that means that at the largest scale, right, as big as we can think, let's just say the Milky Way and this concept of everything spiraling in, right? The arms of the Milky Way and everything pulling in. I love thinking about things on a grand scale. And then think about it down to the smallest scale of the atom, and how the atom is working, and essentially in spiral form, and really anything in between, which is where we find the human being is like in the middle between the macro and the micro, right in the center. Yeah. And to me, this spiral intelligence is what's informing our movement. But it's not just our movement, it's the movement of creation. And our movement, why would we, yeah, exactly. But I mean, think of love, if you think about like the Platonic pretenses for geometry. And, if you look at like the golden ratio or the golden spiral, golden mean, the idea that or the Fibonacci, these reoccurring patterns that we can see in the structure of, a plant developing, or really, the depth of all of this is so profound, man, that it would go way beyond the scope to talk about all of this. But you could say there's
can you point us to a YouTube video or something like that where people could get a glimpse, after this show, they can go watch something on Fibonacci, or they can watch something on just how mathematics, how we've been able to mathematically explain the universe is essentially like that. That's how I think about it.
Well, and I think it's what fascinated me the most were the idea of like the underpinning geometries of creation. So, why do things show up in spheres? Why are we rotating? Well, why are these principles occurring? And these things fascinated me when I was young. And, for various reasons, for the paths I've chosen, the things that I've undertaken, I guess, have kind of continuously pointed me in the direction of certain things. And, I'm really interested in philosophy, and there was a time where mathematicians, philosophers, were not separate. The idea that when you're looking at these geometries that are creating the finite universe that we're existing in, my sense is that we have an operating pattern, a human operating pattern that exists within these systems overall, that's dictated to us by our geometries. We have the ability to go all over the place and do all kinds of things with our body. But what were the movement patterns that survived us, that served us for survival? And so what I've utilized is basically these old patterns, recruited these old patterns that GOTA specifically identifies as existing within what we call the 4 super tribes. So as a coach now for the GOTA system, basically what I tell people is you can easily, clearly see it when you look at crawling babies and the way that a baby works its hips, its spine, that those engines coming together essentially in this movement pattern, and how that develops into our ability to run, or I should say walk and then run. And how when you look at the babies and you look at the late stage toddler sort of infant walking, you can really see these patterns shine. And they're not always there, but genetically speaking, across culture, across genders, what we see, these movement patterns show up everywhere, and they're identical. And so when you look at the babies, when you look at the indigenous people who have maintained the hunter-gatherer societies that are still alive today, and these patterns are very observable in them. That's why I say we're recruiting old patterns, but that's a good thing, because to me, that's what defines this structure, were these old patterns for survival, which was to say forward locomotion was necessary.
Well, if we're going to talk about old patterns and new patterns,
right.
let's talk about new patterns and what the problem with the new patterns are. And the new patterns aren't based off of optimal movement. Right. So what has impacted, why are people moving poorly? If you go and find people who live out in, tribes, people who live out in nature, they're not wearing shoes, they hunt for their food, all that kind of stuff. Why don't we move like them anymore?
Well, I think it was imperative for them, and this falls in line with my idea of self-defense, is that they had an innate system that would protect them. So their movement, they couldn't go beyond the capacity of doing, they weren't going to do certain things that were going to injure themselves. especially living in the bush, you better be on your toes and protected. And
you can't do dumb shit.
You can't blow your knees out. You can't.
Yeah.
And in order to get a PR, it's just not. It's
right.
not. I mean, it's not. That's not what's going to happen. But I guarantee you.
Would you also say, the invention of recliners, shoes with an inch of cushion in them, and our mat, just everything. We live very comfortable lives, and
it's desensitizing, though.
Desensitizing.
Yeah, it's desensitizing. So we're cutting ourselves off from the intuition that those things would allow us. It's more comfortable, like you said, but you're not sensitive to the necessary changes.
I did an interview recently with a guy who's really good at helping people recover from injury and get them back training. And one of the things we got into on that show was the ability to activate muscles and to send a signal to the body to move in a certain way actually requires that you are able to receive the message. You have the proprioception, you have the sensitivity to what's going on there. How can you tell something to do something if you can't even feel what it's like? And I know, and what I've experienced through many different methodologies is improving my sensitivity. I spent about 5 years with the mind of how can I be more sensitive physically, mentally, emotionally? How can I take stimulus and be more sensitive to just the really light things, the feather, instead of having to wait for the brick to come tell me the message.
Sure. Listen to the whispers, as they say.
Yeah. And so that's what you're talking about when we desensitize ourselves by making ourselves comfortable all the time, then, and not actually being in touch with things, but attempting to separate ourselves from what is, then what ends up happening is we end up with poor movement as one of the results of that.
Absolutely. So the you could look at it even more, and you could just say, well, the environment dictates these things, right? So when you have an environment that really supports these movement patterns, or you're not so disconnected, say through generations and generations and generations of being separated from doing hunter-gatherer work, in that regard. But here's the thing. So the next tribe are the multi-decade super athletes who have not sustained, or should be non-contact catastrophic, they haven't sustained these injuries.
All right. So the first group were primitive. The second group are
first group are the babies. What we call late stage crawlers is what we call that. So at the late stage crawling, you can really start to identify these patterns. And then you'll see them also mirrored in the indigenous people around the world. And then you'll see them in these multi-decade super athletes. You can think of like Brady or Jordan or Simone Biles. I mean, we could go down the list of people whose movement patterns absolutely are identical when studied in slow motion, when you can see that. And what I mean by that is that they're not necessarily, what Jordan was doing when he was moving is not the same thing that, say, Simone Biles is doing, but the way that they utilize their feet, their knees, their hips, it all follows these same patterns. And then you have the fourth group would be the late stage marathoners. So the 70-year-old marathoners that are still out there. And when you speak to them, they have no injuries, and you could see that in their patterns as well. And again, I wish I had it all set up. We could really look at this, but if you go to the GOTA channels, GOTA puts everything out there. I mean, they're not holding anything back. It's beautiful in that sense. It's a very open forum. It's a coaching collective. There's all kinds of minds that are looking at this. It really operates, or it's really about operating in forward locomotion properly. I wouldn't discredit anybody's system. I actually think that where we've developed the ability to become so strong really is probably in our transition from being hunter-gatherers to being more agricultural based, and the need for repetition of movement, and how, we've seen, just like we were saying, labor is very similar to current training models. And, it just very, you can actually, the movement pattern in certain things really shows up in these things, but where we see, and this is what GOTA identifies essentially as being a very simple problem, but kind of complex, is that the other movement patterns that you see that create detriment to forward locomotion is training reverse movement patterns, where the feet alignment, the way that we're utilizing our knees and hips and so forth, develop the ability to actually move back, or even to move, to be able to go in a linear fashion, but not really developing that forward dropping in from space, like literal, say, controlled falling motion that forward locomotion is, right? And so this is pretty identifiable. If you look at somebody do, say, like a back jump, where they're clearing a bar, like if they're doing, I don't know, there's various dunks that you'll see where people rotate into it and they jump backwards, right? And if you watch the
like
pattern,
the high jump, where
the high jump, right?
They jump and then they turn. Yeah.
Right. So ultimately, what you see when you're looking at the feet are very similar mechanics occurring when you're doing something like a clean and press. So, that is to say, does the clean and press affect your forward locomotion? I'm not narrowing out I'm not singling out the clean and press. I actually like a lot of those movements. What I've done more for my own personal benefit is add more spiral into the motion when I'm utilizing dumbbells or kettlebells. But the, just the idea of being very linear and really creating a structure, again, that's reverse movement, does that affect the way that you move forward? And I would go as far as to say, yes, it does. So, you have to look at the slow motion video and just just trust your eyes. Just what do you see when you look at yourself moving and running, and you look at the overlay of these patterns over top, where we know that these people who are moving within these parameters are staying healthy and safe. Do you line up? And ultimately, as you move away from that in the spectrum, we can show where the detriment really shows up by falling outside of these patterns.
Yeah. I mean, I can hear what coaches out there will say, what some people out there will say, and the thoughts that I've had, which is there's research to show that if you increase your back squat or your deadlift, that you will run faster, it will improve performance. Otherwise, we wouldn't be lifting weights to improve performance on the field. However, even though there's mountains and mountains of research to show this, and yes, it is true, there's been less research done in other means. It's like, yeah, we've researched this, but we haven't researched all of that. So in my experience of science is, and any scientist will tell you this, is that for every study you conduct, every question that you answer, 1,000 more pop up. And so I want to warn people against what tends to happen is that there's something that is counter to what we were told, and there's research to back up what we were told, and then we go, yes, that is true, and so is this. So it's to me, it's not controversial. It becomes controversial when people don't want to hear additional information. I'm
not attacking. I mean, personally, I have my path. Everybody has their own path. I'm not here to sway anybody. I mean, what I want to do is just, if anything, like you said, help people put an addendum to their training methodology. It's just something else to look at. Now,
hey, we've only been training like this for a short period of time. I
Right.
mean,
And
it used to just be like, the gladiators or there's always been some people lifting something heavy at some point throughout history and people training for athleticism, but the average, the general population hasn't been quote unquote training, but since the 80s, 90s, it hasn't been that long.
that's exactly right. And look, I don't think, what we have seen is it looks like sometimes these movement patterns might be what we call the patterns specifically a code, right? And so we say that some people become uncoded in the process due to adding things into their workouts that are taking them away from their natural skill. So I mean, creating dysfunction. Now, I'm not really in the camp of sitting around picking at other people's training. I don't like to see people get hurt. And
Yeah.
so in that way, I really want longevity for my clients specifically. So that's something that I'm always looking for is how do we keep people safe? And the one thing that I would say is that just because you can doesn't necessarily mean that you should. And we don't always use that philosophy when we're talking about training. A lot of times it's because I can, I'm gonna. And, I just think that ultimately that can lead you down bad paths. Like I've said, I've thrown myself through the ringer a million times. And luckily I've come away pretty unscathed, no bad breaks or injuries in that way. But my movement, is what was throwing me off. And I had spent years more in the CrossFit type of training methodologies, really using heavy kettlebells, working with lots of conditioning exercises. And once I saw what I was doing in relation to these patterns, I realized this is where my injury is coming from. So all I had is an anecdote, and then obviously the clients that I work with and how I've been able to really help some people overcome some of their own personal dysfunction with these patterns. The thing that's fascinating is when you look at the hunter-gatherer. To me, I've really always had a deep calling to nature. I've had a deep calling to the indigenous. I mean, how I deliver my own message when I do my workshops and so forth. So looking at the indigenous and looking at the way that they moved, the way that they throw, the way that they jump, everything, is without question within this realm of what we call turning the corner on the spiral. They are utilizing their body's rotation principles at the highest levels, and they're doing it and not ever getting hurt. Now, can you get a little more out of your body maybe by going outside the realm of certain things? Absolutely. Will you maybe get hurt from this? I think it's a good possibility. So in other words, these patterns will, in my opinion, elevate your movement principles. But, you can still be you could still be tremendous at your skill. Let's say basketball, for instance. You can be a tremendous basketball player and deviate from these patterns. But we will see in most of those cases, go to calls out LeBron from time to time. And, and ultimately LeBron's a great mover, but he has some deficiency in some of these patterns. And we see that this is what leads to certain injuries that he has. He's a great player. His skill is so high level. That really doesn't necessarily have to do with Goda. Goda is more about the feet and, and how that's affecting everything that we talk about builds from the ground up, which again, falls into the philosophy of like what I'm talking about with building a house. So intuitively, it really just spoke to me when I was looking at it. And I've tried everything, every methodology that was out there for running. And this one was the one that really got through to me and I could understand and then relate it back to all of these principles that go much deeper than just running. per se, or even forward locomotion. I mean, these things really inform the way that I'm actually navigating myself through anything, through life, you know?
Yeah.
So you know, it's like the path of least resistance in a way.
So what does this training look like? How's it, what's, you know, I'm hearing spiral. I'm hearing that the way that you were training was training backward motion. How would we know this was different?
Okay, so, well, again, it takes a little bit of time for research, just like I had to do, or I think anybody who's approached the system. You need to look at what they're putting forward. And that's essentially that we're creating, say, coming from a still position where we're in a, you know, just straight up and down. We call it the columns position, basically, where, you know, your feet are straight ahead. You're holding your ankle bones a certain way. Your knees line up with your hips a certain way, and the structure is being built up from the ground. And what we see as a repetitive thing, for instance, is with the athletes that we put into the category of being GOATA, is that they use their legs in the same identifiable way over and over and over again. And that would be that, say, landing, coming from space down to the ground. When we hit, we're hitting with the fifth, fourth, third metatarsal of the foot. The impact, the pressure that's being created there lines the toe up straight.
So this is the pinky toe. This is to be the metatarsal that lines up with the pinky toe and the
fourth and third, right? Say toe
on the outside, not the big toe, the other side.
So we call it So we call that the outside of the foot, the strong side of the foot, right? So the idea that and again, just you can take my word for it, but you can absolutely look at the patterns and see this in slow motion over and over and over again. 10,000 plus hours of video work looked at and studied to see that this is occurring. And so when the foot comes down, it impacts there. And then we have what we call setting a bow. And essentially the bow is the position of the knee in relation to the ankle. So we have the third, fourth, and fifth metatarsal. Let's say we're in a sprint. As it's impacting, it's going to be, we keep the heels off the ground. So there's no connection with the heel, right? Not driving from the heel. All of the motion is coming off the strong side of the foot. And so we're driving in there. This is going to cause the inside ankle bone to sit high. So we're going to, at that point, create a rotation at the knee and at the hip. And so instead of looking at things like through sagittal plane or the planes of the body, I mean, ultimately, I'm going back to that principle you're talking about, looking at things holistically, and that everything is working together in one unison motion, right? So all of the planes are working together, and that what we're seeing is when the foot hits and the knee works its way out, the hips rotate. It's about the alignment. And there are various things that are coming into alignment with what we call setting the bow. Then as the energy transfers from the bow, we have what we call cornering, which is moving basically to the next foot. And this is where you get the key element of the system, is that it's a pivoting system. So this is where I saw the connection in boxing, in throwing, in anything that I've ever done physically without really, any skill set that relates to these patterns, like swinging a bat, throwing a ball, without ever looking at these patterns. I could see the direct connection to the spiral. I could actually physically see the spiral occurring through the fascial lines. I could feel it. I mean, that's what was so fascinating to me. And so what the training looks like is first developing a little bit of an awareness to it, having you could have a generalized approach to the training, but getting down to the prescriptive stuff is where it's at, because what you're doing within the realm of these patterns and what I'm doing could be different things. And if you want to adjust to be more like them, we have lots of exercises. There's no shortage of exercise here, and there's plenty of overlap with common exercises that anybody who trains would be aware of, but we're just trying to really emphasize the structures, again, of the patterns within whatever it is that we're creating resistance with, so I think you see it a lot. I mean, I've followed a ton of your work over the years, man, and I've seen so many people talk about these types of principles in one way or another. It's just really kind of just identifying them as being key to our forward locomotion. And how does that affect you? I mean, do you want to train with it or not? I mean, I could show you how we do a go to squat, for instance, or a go to lunge. It would just be within, again, the parameters of setting the bow, of utilizing the hip rotations and the alignments, and ultimately driving it into the nervous system. Because what we're trying to do is restructure our nervous system and, our ability to react under stress in the moment. Like when you're sprinting, you can't cognitively think about every step. It's just not there. You're going. So we got to get ready before the sprint, obviously, and so this, when I look at my own video work, I can see my changes. They came consciously, but now I'm just holding the frame. And so whether it's gotten into the nervous system or not, it really feels that way to me. In other words, I feel like I no longer have to focus on it, and it's occurring.
Yeah, you've repatterned.
Right, recoded.
Because so like the way people learn is there's the unconscious competence, right? You know about these 4 quadrants or the stages of learning. There's unconscious competence, and the competence may be a dysfunctional pattern, and usually it is. And this applies to physical, mental, emotional patterns, and
right.
And they're all connected. They're all interlinked. And so you have the unconscious competence, and then you become aware. And there's this conscious incompetence. You go, oh, I suck at this. I could be better at this, but I don't maybe even know how. But I'm aware that I could be doing this better, but I'm not. And then there's the conscious competence that go, and that's the stage of learning where you go, oh, I am aware that I'm incompetent at this, and I am putting attention into it to build competence. And now when I put my attention into it, when I focus on my 4th and 5th metatarsal, I become competent. If someone watches me, they go, oh, that looks good. But if I stop thinking about it, if I stop putting my attention on it, I become incompetent again. So it only happens with conscious competence. And that's the hard part of learning, the part where people usually experience failure, because it's hard. It's hard to keep your attention on something long enough to repattern your nervous system. You physically are using your attention to repattern something physically in your body. And we've all done it, whether we know it or not. And then after we get what you're talking about is you move into unconscious competence again, or
right.
Sorry, the first thing was conscious incompetence, or you could say you were competent in dysfunction. And then you finally move into unconscious competence, where now it's just who you are. It's built into your nervous system. It's hardwired. And now you don't know a different way. This is just how it's done.
Compensatory patterning, right?
Yeah.
So and again, it's a form of the desensitizing, so we get a lot of times, the compensatory patterns that we create, or in our movement, for instance, they become, like you said, hardwired, and then almost like comfortable, I mean, it's just the way you do things. And then something goes haywire and you don't know why. And I really think, for me, and I won't speak to anybody else at all, but in my own types of training, I have come to conclusions more than once that I was wrong about things. You know what I mean? And that I needed
Doesn't that
to.
suck? It sucks for like a day, and then you're like, well, I'm glad I figured this out because now I can do it better.
Depends on how you get hit with it. It's you know what I mean? Like it depends on
Yeah.
how that smack in the face came about. But I'm not afraid to admit when I'm wrong. I mean, everything I do, I try on myself first. So if I have clients that I work with, I mean, everything that I've gone through, I've put to the test of fire first. And if in most cases, it's being so impressed by the things that I do that it drives me to want to, at some point, become an instructor of it so that I can keep it relevant in my life most of the time. You know what I mean? Jiu-jitsu was one of the first things like that. After 10 years, it was just kind of like a no-brainer. I was doing it all the time. The economy tanked in 2008, and I'd already had a jiu-jitsu school going, so I left construction and went full force in training all the time, and so it was that switch there, was very organic, made sense, and it was because of just the effectiveness of knowing how well jiu-jitsu works and knowing that I'm actually giving somebody that I fully believe in. So whether or not you go with my belief system, maybe it takes knowing me a little bit and knowing that I vet things as intensely as I can. Again, what I saw with Goda that they were putting forward was that all energy is spirals and waves. Now, this is something that I've been fascinating with, looking at indigenous people over the years. So then they started showing pictures of indigenous people's movement patterns, totally unrelated, but for me, it was this major synchronicity where I was looking at all this stuff and saying to myself, like, I really fully get this. It makes sense to me. It's serving me. I want to be better functioning as a overall mover from the standpoint of I want my running to be good. I've spent years doing gymnastics work and all kinds of different things. I can stand on my hands for a long time. I can do all this stuff. None of that's serving my running. Not a bit of it. You know what I mean? Once I got my feet operating properly, and really it was more than the feet. It was using the various, let's call them engines. Let's say the knees and the hips, and really the hips and the spine, like really started utilizing my spine properly in my running, my back, my shoulders. Man, it was amazing. And until I actually took the time to look at this stuff on slow motion and then make the adjustments. And then I started to say with myself, like, well, what if, these other things that I'm doing, that I'm spending my time on, can I be just as strong doing something else and applying it to the principles? And I've found in every single step of the way at my age with what I'm doing, I've been able to readapt. And that's really what life is about, man. Our neuroplasticity it's totally built on this sense of urgency, the intention, the willpower, the focus and concentration that you utilize against that urgency, and then the recovery from that thing. So that's why the sleep is real important, because there's where we make those shifts, right? And we really make it permanent. And so bringing those things together create true neuroplasticity and adaptation. And so I needed to readapt. I don't know. I've had my life upended several times where I totally had to rethink the way I was thinking completely, and perspective shifts occur. And it's like, man, I can't believe that I used to think like that. I can't believe that I used to do that, And I think people get caught up in patterns of training, like they can't get better, they're not making shifts for their age, or they're not, and all of those things seem to come together real beautifully for me in this situation. And I would never say that what somebody else is doing is wrong, but I can just say for me, doing the things that I was doing wasn't helping me. It was tearing me down.
How long did it take you to change your running pattern? I mean, you're 44. So it's like, a lot of people talk about it, as you get older, it's harder to learn new skills. You've got a longer period of time that you've had with old patterns.
Yeah.
A 25-year-old's only had the bad pattern for 15 years. You've had it for 30 years or whatever it is.
Maybe.
I know I'm right behind you, but I find I learn things faster now than I used to.
Well, it might be though. See, I've had big changes. I was in martial arts when I was younger, for instance. I was extremely flexible. So doing splits, doing these things were really not difficult. I would say over the last 20 years, I've really, and maybe 15 years, I kind of didn't train flexibility that much. And I lost some flexibility because of it. And my strength training regimens, I think, were affecting my flexibility and my range of motion. Since I've been back on this stuff, all my flexibility is coming back to me.
Oh,
and it's coming back to me in a way where I feel very dynamic and strong. I mean, I'm training tons of plyos. I'm doing lots of things that, I've incorporated within this type of training. And everything, I'm showing up when I'm doing it. I feel good, and I feel good all day afterwards. In other words, I really think that these patterns or training movement in this way affects your overall physiology to a degree to where you are tapping into the nervous system and utilizing it in a way that it has been utilized for as long as the human being has been around. You know what I mean? So in other words, I think we're pre-programmed for this stuff. And when you do it, it opens you up and it gives you like a healing modality by actually incorporating. Now, this is woo-woo, and I'm not going to go down that path too much, but man, I can just tell you, my joints feel good. My body feels good. It took me I was hurting at the 2-mile mark when I was trying to approach distance running. 2-mile mark, I started to break down. By the 3rd mile, I was turning around, walking home. Now I'm running 15 miles solid. 15 miles, no problem. That took me probably the course of about 3 months.
Oh, wow.
3 to 4 months to get
not that long at all.
No, not that long at all.
Yeah. How much of that was endurance versus mechanics?
It was mechanics, almost all. But the interesting thing is when I started implementing the mechanics properly, it was pushing my endurance more because I was getting more work capacity. So I was traveling faster. I was working my body more completely.
Interesting.
And the intention and the awareness of everything, I think, was wearing me out a little bit too. So, but all of that subsided and resolved. And now I'm thinking about other things instead of the focus. And what's funny is I will still get into these bad patterns. I mean, I wake up in these patterns every morning, the compensatory negative, feet are not wanting to line up where I want them. So I have to be conscious about it every morning. Just walking to take a piss. I'm
and it's getting easier, I imagine.
Yes.
It's getting easier. Wow.
Yeah. So anyway, that's all super fascinating. And I think if you go down the GOTA rabbit hole, there's plenty of information there. It's like anything with talking about functional patterns or exercise that people get frustrated with some of that stuff, man. And I'm not interested in frustrating anybody or saying you shouldn't do what you're doing. What I think is just look at more, open your mind to a broader perspective and realize in this, like, if you really want to get to an objective, it's like what I'm looking at specifically is how we fit into nature. And this, these things really inform that type of perspective, and so maybe you're trying to defy those realms. I want to better fit in and feel confident that what I'm doing is maybe what was outlined for us.
Yeah. Well, that's the difference between forcing things and experiencing true power. Power, you're able to harness what's already there, and force is a resistance against what is. And as much resistance that forcing things offers to make us stronger, a lot of times it's it's just rowing the boat the wrong direction. We could be going downstream and going a lot faster and enjoying the ride more.
That's right.
And going back to what you're saying with the nervous system, you know, and making and it as you're training these new mechanics and all these other things start coming online. Oh, I'm feeling better. It's like, well, the nervous system impacts the hormonal system, the endocrine system. So it doesn't surprise me one bit. I mean, we know that if you squat 5 sets of 5, a back squat on Monday, that on Thursday and Friday, your testosterone is going to be higher. That's the nervous system signaling to the body, hey, we need to recover. Hey, we're doing heavy shit. So it wouldn't surprise me one bit is if you are putting your attention into reshaping your nervous system and then creating forward motion, that you would produce hormones for forward motion.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, you know, we know that just the attempts over and over again really create this. But for me, it was that whole neuroplastic or plastic approach, which was, you know, I had a sense of urgency. I'll be honest, I was going through some emotional stuff, man. I had in early February, specifically, or actually even a little before in January, we got a diagnosis of my dog had cancer, and she was totally fine, but she that we could see, but she had a small oral growth, and it was extremely aggressive. And, you know, all of her other faculties seemed to be totally normal other than this cancerous growth growing in her mouth. And she was, you know, I mean, I have children, and she was also like another baby to me. It was very difficult for me. And it was like, I was really putting in the time. I had already done it up for a few months prior, but I was really putting in the time for the running at that point. And I was cranking out. I mean, literally going between 15 and 20 miles on the run. And though I would feel worn out by the end of the day, for sure, I was waking up the next morning feeling good. And I knew that I was definitely onto something, that I could do this. And I mean, there was a sense of urgency that was driving me from my loss that was occurring, the need to be able to release the emotional body and not do it in a way that made me feel debilitated, but I could just go run and just everything would leak out. You know what I mean? Like the tears came, the sweat came, it all came. It just and it would clear out, and just putting down that time, and then focusing on being with her when I could, to you know, ease her suffering until we ultimately had to put her down. I went from that right into COVID, losing my business, or my business shutting down, all my training for the year going offline, everything being done. Yeah. And so I just kept running, man. I just kept doing the running. I mean, just like today, just put in the running. And then, I don't know, it's really created a healing modality for me beyond the just the training, you know. It's like spiritual sort of.
Yeah.
So, you know,
you got me all hyped up, dude. I'm hanging out here in Utah near Zion, and I have some of the most beautiful trails to run on. And, you know, I would like to run more, but I haven't run much. I mean, every once in a while I'll run a Spartan race, and that's actually pretty tough on me because I don't train for them much. So now I'm wanting to run every day, and I'm like, all right, I have to back off. I can't do it every day, or else I'm gonna end up busting up my knees or something. But you're gonna be analyzing my movement soon. Making sure
absolutely.
I'm not completely fucking myself up.
No, and you know it too, right? I mean, that's the thing that sort of brings the intuition to some validation, is when you say, well, these are the things that hurt, and then you look at it on video and you're like, oh, okay, well,
yeah,
I can understand
not
why.
doing that.
Yeah.
I run a lot better than I used to. So I've had a decent amount of running training, but it's still not, it's still not where I know it could be. There's a lot of people that have much better running mechanics than I do.
Yeah. Oh, me too. I'm terrible. It was never on my radar. I stand my ground and wrestle. You know what I mean? I never thought about it. But honestly, the best thing in the world for wrestling, for martial arts, is running. The motions that you're going to utilize over and over and over again are right there in the mechanics of each step. And so it really turns each step into an ability to focus your movement, you know, and to train your motion.
Yeah, I mean, I work with a lot of coaches. Some of them are jiu-jitsu gym owners, and man, their clients are drilling on their wives at home or their husbands, and like, if your thing is CrossFit, you buy a kettlebell and a bar, you get some equipment. And by the way, all the equipment's sold out right now, so it actually isn't that easy. But, people doing calisthenics, they're getting their sweat on. I hear some people are going crazy with their limitations, but of any sport that has limitations, it's anything that's a combat sport related thing. And jiu-jitsu is so popular, man, jiu-jitsu just got taken away from a lot of people.
A lot of people.
I interviewed John Beneducci last week.
Yeah, I saw that.
It's fucking hilarious. It was like what got my attention was he was posting Instagram of him wrestling with his dummy. And that's when I realized I was like, oh shit, there's a lot of jujitsu, like, because I was viewing it through the gym owner of owner, this sucks because, like, what do you do? And then there's John over there wrestling dummies online and making it hilarious. And I'm like,
you mat your room.
You mat the room.
Yeah, can you see the mat?
Yeah.
So so I'm mad in my room, and my poor kids. That's all I can say. My poor kids and my wife. Yeah, they're all getting we're all training jiu-jitsu at home now.
Everyone's a black belt. That's
right. Yeah, I mean, I really worry about the jiu-jitsu world. I'm not gonna lie. This thing is gonna be it's going to have an impact. And I'm friends with, I have friends that have some of the biggest academies in the world. And, I mean, when you see everything just coming to a grinding halt, you have to wonder, my training comes from a few different things, man. Guys who only have jiu-jitsu, I worry about those guys, man. I wonder, because what are we going to do? Are we just going to all run back? Is everybody going to run? I mean, what's it going to take? Is it just going to be that the news says everything's good now, or are we going to have to go through knows what to get back? Or is it going to be, this thing where if we just let it go, are people going to just stay,
I think
away?
I think they'll start. I think they'll let things come back in phases. They're like, okay, if you're running a retail store, go ahead and open up your retail store if you're selling apparel or whatever. And then restaurants and gyms are going to be the last ones that are allowed to open, and who I don't know how long that's going to last. And then even when that happens, people have put themselves in isolation so long. And someone brought this up the other day, is think about the kids, their minds are much more impressionable. And the more things are normalized at an early stage in life, the more it is the way it is for that person. They just think that these things are true. So I'm concerned about the over sanitation of the planet right now, is in creating super bugs for one. And then because everyone's just so freaked out. And then for two, the ability for people to be comfortable to touch again. You know, there's people talking about never shaking hands again, which I just want to punch them in the throat over that. And so who knows what's really going to happen, but I do know at some point people are going to want to get in physical contact. I want to do jujitsu again. I'm not afraid of catching something from somebody.
No,
And
I mean, I honestly think the jiu-jitsu guys are ready to come back. They could care less. They're more freaked out about ringworm than they are about COVID. You know what I mean? So it's like you tell everybody there's ringworm on the mat, and then people are like, all right, I'll skip today. But
well, that's the thing is they're used to dealing with infections here and there. Everyone knows those when you get on the mat, you know that you're rolling around in shit, and they're probably some of the most robust people on the whole planet. You know.
I mean, it's very true, man. Martial arts lends towards longer life. I really believe that. Yeah. You know, there's a longevity in the practice, and I believe that comes down to the condition of your nervous state and how it's maintained, you know, day to day. And this has really been my objective and my focus is that I want to make sure, you know, that I'm aware of that. I mean, it's funny if I read something with all this stuff out there's to read now. If I'm reading something, I can definitely feel how it's impacting me. Yeah. You know what I mean? And I'm sure most people are like that. I mean, I would hope so, but I have a feeling
I don't think
people
know.
Out there.
The average person has no idea.
You know, we all know the feeling for people who exercise. Everybody knows that feeling of like crushing a workout and then, you know, you've driven home, you're at home now, and you're really in that parasympathetic state from you know, the push and everything. Well, what's fascinating with the ice training is that when you step into ice water, you know, and you get it over your chest, you're going to have this massive sympathetic shock. And, you know, and really what changes that what makes the adaptation is the breath. So controlling your breathing, making that conscious shift where, and I've seen it happen so many times, thousands of times, I've watched people's eyeballs go through, you know, I mean, we've done workshops together, you know, it's like, I've seen that shift happen so many times with people, and it's amazing. It's a true grasp of power, personal power, you know, that to know you can make that shift and go, okay, this isn't bad at all. And then when you get out, you warm up. Now you're in that parasympathetic, that deep relaxation, but alert and you know, and confident, I think. And so martial arts creates that daily. And man, I've gotten so many texts from my students and whatnot, which has been, you know, really makes you feel good. But I really get the sense and at the bit to be on that.
All right, man. Let's wrap it up here, Brandon. Dude, so stoked we got to have you on. I know people got a lot out of this conversation, and I know they want to know more from you. Where can they get more information about what you're up to? Tell us about Instagram, website, whatever you got going on.
Yes, we just have a brand new site that we brought. The company is called Fyre, PHYR, and we have a new website on fyre.com. You can link to that if you want to, Mike. And we have I'm on Instagram. Is it unstable? Can you still hear me, man?
Yeah, we're good. It is a little unstable. What I'm gonna do is you're gonna send me links for everything. I'm gonna post it in the comments on the Facebook thread on the Strong Coach page, and what we'll do is it'll end up in the blog description as well. So go ahead and repeat it again, because people are only listening to this as well. So repeat it again, and then we'll also post it on those things.
So onfyre.com is our website. ONPHYR, onfyre.com. And then there's you can check out on the Wim Hof methods. I have a page on there, and there's a lot of you know, you could see a bunch of different people's perspectives on my training there if you're interested. There's the WimHofMethod.com, there's onfyre.com. You can find me on Instagram, Brandon Powell 396. Get into the 3, the 9, and the 6. It's real important in all of this. And then there's that's it, really. That's it. You can find me if you're interested. If you're really interested on Facebook, come to our Fire. It's called Fire Dojo, PHYRDOJO members page, and join the conversation there if you'd like to. Firedojo.com. Cool. Yeah, man.
Awesome, Brandon. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, Mike. It was great to talk to you, buddy.
Hey, just hang on.